The origin of time.
What is time? The secret hidden inside time.
What if everything you believe about time is wrong? But not partially wrong, completely wrong. What if time itself is not moving at all? In fact, what if time does not exist? Most people never question time. They assume it is simply there, flowing, carrying them from birth to death. But what if time is not a thing? What if it's an effect? And what if understanding the origin of time changes the way you understand manifestation, parallel realities, old souls, identity, memory, karma, and even free will itself? Because if time is not what it appears to be, then nothing is what it appears to be. There is a secret hidden inside time. There are no moving parts.
Time does not really exist. Sequence doesn't really exist. It is just movement in the fourth dimension. Time is a perceptual consequence of sequence, just as space is a perceptual consequence of localization. Time is born from sequence, but sequence is not inherent to reality. It emerges from consciousness comparing one remembered state to another. Sequence is generated by consciousness remembering previous perceptual states while experiencing new ones. Time arises when consciousness experiences reality sequentially. Time is what consciousness experiences when it forgets it is every when. Time and space are actually two sides of the same phenomenon. They are both consequences of fragmentation. Because the moment consciousness ceases perceiving itself as a unified whole, distinctions emerge. And distinctions require separation. That separation can be experienced in two fundamental ways. Space is perceived separation between things. Time is perceived separation between events. In other words, space separates where. Time separates when. But both originate from the same underlying process, the fragmentation of awareness. A fully unified consciousness would perceive no distance between points and no distance between moments. Everything would be present simultaneously. Everything would be here. Everything would be now. In fact, the notions of here and now would lose their meaning entirely because they only exist relative to there and then. And those distinctions require fragmentation. Without fragmentation, there is no subject and object. There is no self and no other. There is no here and no there. There's no before and no after. There's no distance. There's no duration. Only total simultaneity. Space is what oneness looks like when viewed through multiple locations. And time is what oneness looks like when viewed through multiple moments. Both are generated by the same act of perceptual division. The one becomes many. The eternal becomes sequential. The omnipresent becomes localized. The simultaneous becomes temporal. This also suggests something profound. Space and time are not containers in which consciousness exists. Consciousness is the container within which space and time appear. Because without a fragmented observer, there would be no way to experience either. Who would perceive distance if there were no separate points of awareness? Who would perceive duration if there were no sequential perceptions? Space and time require a perceiver capable of experiencing separation. And separation requires fragmentation of consciousness. Fragmentation is not a mistake. It is the mechanism that makes experience possible. If consciousness remained completely unified, there would be no stories, no journeys, no relationships, no exploration, no discovery, no becoming. Space creates the possibility of meeting. Time creates the possibility of unfolding. Together, they create the possibility of experience itself. The deeper consciousness descends into fragmentation, the more solid space appears, and the more linear time appears. The more consciousness returns toward unity, the less absolute space and time appear. Distance begins to feel less real. Synchronicity increases. Intuition transcends ordinary sequence. Past, present, and future begin bleeding into one another. Space and time are not merely dimensions of reality. They are the perceptual architecture that allows oneness to experience itself as multiplicity. Time is what infinity looks like when viewed through a limited perspective. Time is the illusion of sequence generated by localized awareness. Time is born the moment consciousness stops seeing everything at once. Time is the appearance created when consciousness experiences reality through fragments rather than as a whole. Time is the experiential distance between perceptual states created by the fragmentation of awareness. Time emerges when Source ceases looking from everywhere simultaneously and begins looking from somewhere. So, time is an effect of unified consciousness fragmenting itself in order to explore the infinite variations of itself. As consciousness learns, remembers, and shifts perspectives, it creates the appearance of sequence, and sequence creates the appearance of time. The more fragmented a consciousness becomes, the more linear time appears to be. And the closer consciousness returns to the state of Source, the more simultaneous reality appears. Which means that, at the level of Source itself, time does not exist at all. Just as space does not exist at that level. Because, at the level of Source, consciousness is everything and perceives everything. So, there is no experience of contrast. And contrast is precisely what is necessary for both time and space to exist in the first place. how I would explain it to a layman. Imagine you're watching a movie. To you, the movie unfolds scene by scene. The beginning comes first. The ending comes later. The characters experience time, but the entire movie already exists on the hard drive. Every frame is already there. The characters experience sequence because they are inside the story. You experience sequence because you're watching the frames one at a time. Now imagine reality works similarly. The sensation of time comes from consciousness moving through experience frame by frame rather than perceiving the entire structure simultaneously. In that sense, time is not necessarily the thing that moves. Consciousness is what moves. And time is simply what the movement feels like from the inside. So, time is not the movement of reality. Time is the experience of reality generated by the movement of awareness through it. Time is the experience of watching reality frame by frame instead of all at once. Time is the perceptual consequence of fragmented awareness. It is what reality appears to be when consciousness ceases perceiving the whole simultaneously and instead experiences itself through localized points of view. Time is not what causes events to unfold. Time is what the unfolding of awareness feels like from within fragmentation. A fully unified consciousness would perceive all relationships, all possibilities, and all perspectives simultaneously. There would be no before and no after, only is. But the moment consciousness narrows its focus, sequence emerges, and sequence creates the appearance of time. When consciousness fragments from source, it begins experiencing time because it begins experiencing distinction. For the first time, there is this and not this. A point of reference appears. A perspective appears. An observer appears. And the moment one thing can be distinguished from another, comparison becomes possible. The moment comparison becomes possible, sequence becomes possible. One perception, then another. One thought, then another. One experience, then another. And the apparent separation between those experiences is what consciousness experiences as time. Time begins the moment consciousness distinguishes one thing from another. Before distinction, there is only oneness. No observer, no observed, no comparison, no sequence. But the moment consciousness says this and not this, a perspective is born. And the moment a perspective is born, sequence is born. And the perception of sequence is the foundation of time. In that sense, time is not a thing. It is an effect. It is a consequence of fragmentation. You could even say, time is a mechanism through which consciousness experiences separation. Not separation in space, separation in experience. Without time, every experience would collapse into a single, simultaneous totality. There would be no discovery, no anticipation, no memory, no story, no learning, no journey, no becoming. Time creates experiential distance between states that already coexist within a larger reality. It is the spacing mechanism that allows consciousness to encounter itself piece by piece rather than all at once. Why time feels so real? Because memory creates continuity. Your consciousness does not perceive all possible states simultaneously. It remembers one sequence of states, and that remembered sequence creates the feeling of movement through time. The past is remembered, the future is anticipated, the present is experienced. And from this triad emerges the sensation of temporal flow. But what is truly moving is not time. What is moving is attention. It is consciousness that moves. But it is not time that creates memory. It is memory that creates the experience of time. Or more precisely, sequence creates memory, and memory creates the experience of time. Here's why. Imagine a consciousness that perceives only one moment. No memory, no anticipation, no comparison. Could it experience time? Not really. It would simply experience what is. To experience time, consciousness must be able to compare its current state to another state. And comparison requires memory. The moment awareness remembers a previous perceptual state, a distinction appears. This happened. This is happening. Immediately, there is a past, there is a present. And once a remembered past exists, an imagined future becomes possible. Past, present, future. The entire temporal structure is born. In fact, you could argue that without memory, time collapses into the eternal present. Following the logic we've been developing, a question that naturally appears is this. If memory creates the experience of time, then what stores the memory? Because if the brain stores memory, that only explains memory during a physical incarnation. It doesn't explain soul memory, intuitive knowing, déjà vu, the old soul phenomena, or the continuity of consciousness beyond a single lifetime. A possible answer is this. If consciousness evolves through experience, then every experience changes its configuration. Every realization, every fear, every integration, every expansion, every fragmentation, the soul becomes different because of them. In this sense, memory is not something the soul has. Memory is something the soul is. For example, a person who learns compassion is changed by that experience forever. Even if every explicit memory disappeared, something about their structure would still be different. The experience became part of their being. So perhaps certain memories are not remembered only in the way humans remember what they ate for breakfast yesterday, for example. They are embodied. This is why some knowledge can feel familiar without being consciously remembered. Why some people seem naturally drawn towards certain lessons, places, ideas, people, or experiences. Why certain truths can feel less like learning and more like remembering. The soul remembers because it remains connected to what it has experienced. Not necessarily through chronological storage, although that also exists, but through informational continuity. The experience leaves an imprint, not somewhere, but within the very structure of consciousness itself. So coming back to the concept of old souls. Again, it's not that some souls are older in an absolute temporal sense, but that some consciousnesses have access to a larger accumulated range of remembered experience. For something to be older, there must be an objective temporal sequence. But if all experiential configurations ultimately already exist within a larger unified timeless existence, then age is not an accurate description. Access to memory is, or perhaps access to integrated experience. What people call an old soul is simply a consciousness that remembers more, not necessarily more past lives in a literal chronological sense, but remembers more of itself, more perspectives, more patterns, more consequences, more relationships, more layers of reality, more of the whole. Likewise, what people call a young soul is not a newly created consciousness. It is a consciousness operating through a greater degree of forgetting, a narrower memory horizon, a more localized perspective, a stronger identification with immediate experience. In fact, there is no such thing as an old soul or a young soul. There is only different degrees of remembrance. Wisdom itself is not primarily the accumulation of knowledge. Wisdom is the recovery of memory, not memory of facts, memory of being, which is why some individuals can seem ancient despite being young in biological age. They are not necessarily carrying more years. Their consciousness is carrying more remembrance. Let's go back to what I said in the beginning. There are no moving parts. This means that at the deepest level, nothing's actually traveling from point A to point B. Movement is part of the projection. Just as a movie screen never really truly moves, the motion is created by sequential frames. Existence itself is fundamentally still, complete, and simultaneous. You are the awareness experiencing the sequence. From that perspective, reality is not being built moment by moment. It is already whole. What you call life is your movement through that already existing totality. Like a film reel. Time does not really exist. Sequence doesn't really exist. It is just movement in the fourth dimension. The flow of time is actually the perception of movement through a higher dimensional structure. Think of it this way. A 2D being living inside a flat sheet of paper would only perceive slices of a 3D object moving through its plane. For example, imagine a sphere passing through a 2D world. The 2D being would not perceive the full sphere. It will only perceive changing cross-sections. First a point, then a growing circle, then a shrinking circle, then disappearance. To the 2D being, this would appear as birth, growth, decay, death. But from the 3D perspective, the sphere was always whole. The 2D being was only perceiving sequential slices of a larger structure. Human consciousness operates similarly with the fourth dimension. What we call time is the experience of consciousness moving through successive cross-sections of a higher dimensional reality. In other words, your entire life already exists as a complete 4D structure. But here is the thing. There are infinite variations of that structure, infinite versions of 4D you, and consciousness continuously moves between them. What humans call decision, manifestation, growth, or change are not literally the creation of a brand new reality from nothing. It is the navigation of awareness through different already existing configurations of reality. In other words, you are not creating reality moment by moment. You are shifting perspective within an infinite informational field that already contains every possible variation of experience. Every possible version of you already exists as potential within that structure. The version who remained asleep, the version who awakened, the version who chose fear, the version who chose love, the version who gave up, the version who transcended. And what you call your life simply is the pathway awareness takes through these possibilities. This is why consciousness, focus, belief, emotion, memory, perception, and identity matter so profoundly, because they influence which regions of the structure awareness becomes compatible with, like tuning into different frequencies of the same infinite field. The more fragmented consciousness becomes, the narrower its accessible range of realities becomes. The more coherent consciousness becomes, the more pathways begin opening. So, coming back to the subject of time, the illusory experience of time is only possible through the fragmentation of focus, of awareness. Because if awareness were fully unified, completely undivided, it would perceive everything simultaneously. There would be no before and no after, no sequence, no movement from one state into another, only total presence. Time emerges from partial perception. It is the result of consciousness focusing itself through limited points of view rather than perceiving the whole at once. In other words, time is what reality feels like when awareness observes itself through fragments. A fully unified consciousness does not need to wait for reality to unfold because it perceives the entire pattern already simultaneously, much like seeing an entire painting at once instead of scanning it pixel by pixel. In this sense, time does not truly flow. Awareness flows. And the sensation of time is produced by the movement of focus across already existing configurations of reality. This would mean that manifestation is not the absolute creation of something from nothing, but the selective navigation of consciousness through an eternal informational structure that has always been. The structure has always existed. Reality does not appear moment by moment. Rather, all states, structures, possibilities, beings, and experiential configurations already exist simultaneously within a larger totality. What changes is not existence itself. What changes is the point of focus moving through it. This is an extremely important distinction. From within fragmented consciousness, reality appears to become. But from outside sequential perception, reality simply is. In other words, things do not truly come into existence. Awareness simply enters different relationships with what already exists. This also radically changes the meaning of creation. Because creation will no longer necessarily mean bringing something from non-existence into existence. Instead, creation means selecting, focusing, configuring, expressing, collapsing potentials into localized experience, organizing already existing informational structures into perceivable forms. Like tuning into a frequency rather than manufacturing the frequency itself. Or like illuminating one region of an infinite structure that was always there, but not previously within localized awareness. Eternity is difficult for the human mind to grasp, because humans often imagine eternity as an infinite amount of time. But true timelessness is not endless duration. It is the absence of duration altogether. So if time does not exist, then it means everything has always existed, because the non-existence of time implies no beginning and no end, but not only for source and its fragments of awareness. It implies that everything has always existed. All its manifestations, explorations, everything that is has always existed. Likewise, what humans call new ideas are not literally manufactured from nothing, but accessed from deeper layers of an already existing informational field. What humans call discovery is not truly an invention, but recognition. Scientists do not create mathematics. Musicians do not create music. Mystics do not create truth. Philosophers do not create meaning. They tune into structures that already exist within the informational field of reality, you see? This is why multiple people throughout history often arrive at the same ideas independently and simultaneously. Not because the idea was generated from nothing multiple times, but because consciousness was reaching the same informational layer from different perceptual entry points. Likewise, intuition itself may function less like imagination and more like subtle pattern recognition across deeper layers of reality that the conscious mind cannot fully localize. The more fragmented awareness becomes, the denser and more linear time appears. The more unified awareness becomes, the more simultaneous reality appears. At the extreme end of fragmentation, consciousness experiences itself as isolated identity moving through irreversible linear time. At the extreme end of unity, all moments collapse into eternal presence. The most radical implication. If time is generated by fragmented awareness, then events are not truly separated at all. The apparent distance between cause and effect is part of the illusion. This would mean what appears as karma is the same event viewed from opposite perspectives, perfectly geometrically aligned. What appears to be one event happening now and another happening later is, from a higher perspective, the same event viewed from different points of perception. What appears as consequence is consciousness eventually encountering itself from another angle, from the other side of the same action. What appears as karma is not a cosmic reward and punishment system. It is the same event experienced from opposite sides, perfectly aligned, perfectly symmetrical, perfectly geometrical. The one who acts and the one who receives are ultimately the same consciousness viewed through different localizations. This is why what you do to another, you ultimately do to yourself. Not because a universal law punishes you, not because some external force keeps score, but because there is only one being here, and eventually that one being experiences every side of its own interactions. What appears as future already coexists with what appears as past. Time simply prevents these relationships from being perceived simultaneously. It creates the illusion that events are disconnected, that causes and consequences are separate, that actions and experiences belong to different beings, that one moment is unrelated to another. What seemed like many events were always one event. What seemed like many lives were always one life.